The air in the Valley of Howls didn't just carry the scent of pine and ancient stone. It was thick with the suffocating electric musk of 1,000 lichens in a state of primal fever. High above the ceremonial clearing, tucked into a crevice of jagged obsidian, Lyra, her name a whisper from the starlit tragedy of the Golden Compass, and her surname, Belacqua, a nod to the same defiant spirit, pressed her body against the freezing rock. She was an Omega-born, a girl whose lineage was so diluted she was considered little more than a ghost in her own pack. Forbidden from the sacred mating, she was supposed to be in the low-caste barracks, scrubbing floors. Instead, she was breathing in the forbidden. Hello to all my wonderful story lovers from around the globe. It is so good to have you back in the circle tonight. I'm curious, where are you watching from as we begin this tale of forbidden fate? Tell me your city in the comments. And if you've ever felt like an outsider looking in on a world you weren't good enough for, hit that subscribe button right now. We're a pack of our own here, and I never want you to miss a chapter of these emotional journeys. Below, the clearing was a sea of fur and firelight. The great pyre roared, casting long dancing shadows that looked like warring spirits. At the center stood Kaelin, his name echoing the brooding intensity of the Covenant and his surname, Thorn, pulled from the dark elegance of Crimson Peak. He was the Lycan King, a man whose presence felt like a physical weight on the lungs of everyone within a mile. He stood shirtless in the sub-zero wind, his skin bronzed by firelight and mapped with the silver scars of 100 victories. Tonight was the night of the lunar thread. Kaelin was expected to choose a high alpha female to secure the bloodline. The atmosphere was one of forced celebration, but Lyra could see the tension in Kaelin's jaw. He didn't look like a man choosing a bride. He looked like a man preparing for an execution. Lyra shifted her weight, a tiny pebble dislodging under her boot. It tumbled down the cliffside, a sound no human could ever hear over the roar of the fire and the chanting of the elders. But Kaelin wasn't human. The king was in the middle of the blood oath, his hand hovering over the silver bowl, when he suddenly froze. His nostrils flared, his chest expanding as he drew in a deep, lung-filling breath. The chanting faltered. The high alpha female, dressed in white furs, stepped forward, confused. "High King," she whispered. Kaelin didn't answer. He turned his head slowly, his eyes shifting from a piercing blue to a predatory, molten gold. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking up. Straight at the shadows. Straight at her. The scent hit him like a physical blow to the heart. Wild honey, rain-drenched jasmine, and a metallic spark of otherness that shouldn't exist in an Omega. It was the scent of a soul tether, a bond so ancient it predated the laws of the pack. "Stop the ceremony," Kaelin commanded, his voice a low, tectonic rumble that silenced the valley. "High King, the moon is at its peak," the elder hissed. "The ritual must." Kaelin's hand shot out, gripping the elder's staff with bone-crushing force. "I said, stop." He began to walk toward the cliffside, the crowd parting like a black sea. Every eye followed his gaze upward. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. She was trapped. She was a peasant who had defiled the most sacred night of the year. The punishment was exile, or worse. "Come down," Kaelin growled, the word vibrating through the stone and into Lyra's very marrow. He didn't say it as a threat. He said it as a claim. Why would a king halt the destiny of his bloodline for a girl who wasn't even supposed to have a scent? And what was the secret Lyra's blood held that was about to turn the entire Lycan world into a battlefield? The descent from the obsidian ledge felt like walking into a furnace. Every eye in the valley, thousands of them, glowing with predatory judgment, was fixed on Lyra as she scrambled down the rock face. Her fingers bled and her simple homespun tunic was snagged by thorns, but she didn't feel the pain. All she felt was the crushing weight of Kaelin Thorne's gaze. When her boots finally hit the soft meadow grass of the clearing, the silence was so absolute she could hear the crackle of the dying embers in the great pyre. She stood there, a small, trembling figure in the center of a circle of gods. "Before we dive into the secret Lyra has been keeping, I want to know, have you ever felt like you didn't belong in the place you were born? Like you were meant for something else entirely? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you're rooting for the underdog tonight, make sure to subscribe so you can see Lyra's true power revealed." Lyra Belacqua was a ghost wolf. In a pack that valued raw strength and dominant pheromones, she was a void. She had never shifted. She had no rank. Her parents had been low-level laborers who died in a border skirmish, leaving her to be raised by the pack's collective indifference. Her deepest desire wasn't for a mate or a crown. It was for a voice. She spent her days in the great library of the elders, a place she was only allowed to enter to sweep the floors, memorizing the old tongues and the forbidden maps of the world beyond the valley. She was the only Lycan who knew that the moon wasn't a god. It was a mirror. And tonight, it was reflecting a truth the elders had tried to bury. Kalen stepped toward her, his movements fluid and lethal. Up close he was terrifying. The scars on his chest weren't just from silver. Some were from the teeth of his own kin who had tried to challenge his right to rule. He stopped inches from her, his heat radiating off him in waves that made Lyra's vision swim. "You," he breathed, the word a ragged growl. He didn't look at her like an intruder. He looked at her like a man who had been starving and had just found a feast. He reached out, his calloused hand hovering near her throat. The crowd gasped. For a king to touch an Omega during the mating ceremony was a desecration of the highest order. "My king, she is a nothing." The high alpha female, Lady Isabella, named for the elegance of the Golden Age and the sharp edge of Crimson Peak, shrieked, her face contorted in rage. "She is a servant. An unshifted runt." Kalen's eyes never left Lyra's. "She is the only thing in this valley that smells of the first blood," he whispered so low only Lyra could hear. Lyra's heart skipped. First blood. The lineage of the original Lycan queens, a line thought to be extinct for 3 centuries. The elders had told her she was an Omega because she had no scent, but the truth was her scent was so ancient, so pure that the modern Lycans, diluted by generations of political breeding, couldn't even register it. Except for the king. The king's blood was pure enough to hear the call. "I didn't mean to. I was just watching," Lyra stammered, her voice small but clear. "I'll go. I'll leave the valley. Just let me go." "You aren't going anywhere," Kalen said, his fingers finally closing around the back of her neck. It wasn't a choke. It was a cradling, a protective grip that sent a jolt of white-hot electricity through her spine. In that touch, Lyra felt Kalen's loneliness. She saw the burden of a king who was expected to breed for power rather than love. She felt the hollow ache in his chest that had been there since his coronation. "She has committed sacrilege," the lead elder barked, stepping forward with his silver-tipped spear. "She must be marked for exile." King Kalen, finish the ceremony with Lady Isabella and let the guards take the girl. Kalen turned his head slightly, his lip curling into a snarl that exposed teeth longer and sharper than any human's. "The ceremony is finished," he announced, his voice booming across the valley like thunder. He took Lyra's hand and raised it high. "I have found the thread. The moon has spoken." A ripple of shock went through the pack. This wasn't just a choice, it was a rebellion. By claiming an Omega during the sacred hour, Kalen was challenging the very laws that kept the pack together. Lyra looked at the faces in the crowd, the hatred in Isabella's eyes, the calculation in the elders, and the sudden flickering hope in the eyes of the other low-caste Omegas. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a spark in a valley of dry wood. "Why me?" she whispered, looking up at him as the first snow of the season began to fall. Kalen leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Because you are the only one who doesn't smell like a lie." But as the pack began to howl in protest, a dark shadow moved at the edge of the forest. The feral wards, those who had been exiled and turned into monsters, were watching. And they had been waiting for the king to show a weakness. The girl who never meant to stand beside him was now the only thing standing between him and a coup. "The claim has been made, but the danger is just beginning." The howl that answered Kalen's declaration didn't come from the pack. It was a jagged, wet sound, the sound of vocal cords shredded by madness and silver rot. From the tree-line of the Whispering Woods, a figure emerged that made even the bravest high alphas recoil. It was Silas, his name a dark echo from the religious zealotry of the Da Vinci Code, and his surname Vane, a mark of the discarded from Black Sails. Silas was a flayed one, a Lycan who had been exiled decades ago for practicing the forbidden rites of the blood moon. His skin was a patchwork of scars, and his eyes were a milky, sightless white, yet he moved with a precision that suggested he saw the world through the vibrations of the earth. "A king who chooses a shadow over a sun is a king who invites the dark," Silas croaked, his voice carrying over the whimpering of the younger wolves. "Before we see the first blow struck, I have to ask you, Have you ever had to stand up for someone when the whole world was pointing a finger at them? Takes a special kind of courage. Tell me about a time you stood your ground in the comments. And if you're ready to see Kalen defend his choice, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. The battle for the valley starts now. Kalen didn't let go of Lyra's hand. If anything, his grip tightened, his thumb stroking the back of her palm in a silent command to stay behind him. Silas, you were cast out for a reason. Step back into the trees, or I will finish what the council started 20 years ago. The council is a tomb of old men, Kalen, Silas laughed, a rattling sound in his chest. But the girl is a key. You smell it, don't you? The first blood. The sweetness of a crown that hasn't been worn in 3 centuries. Silas raised a gnarled hand and suddenly, the shadows at the edge of the clearing began to detach themselves from the trees. These weren't just ferals. They were the hollowed Lycans who had traded their humanity for raw, uncontrollable power. They were faster, stronger, and utterly devoid of mercy. Seize the girl, the lead elder suddenly screamed, his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate terror. If the ferals want her, she is the cause of this curse. Give her to them and save the pack. The betrayal was instantaneous. The High Alphas, spurred by the elder's command and their own jealousy of the Omega who had stolen their king's attention, lunged forward. Lyra's world turned into a kaleidoscope of snarls and silver. She saw Lady Isabella shift midair, a blur of white fur and ivory fangs aimed directly at Lyra's throat. Kalen didn't wait. He didn't even shift. He met Isabella's charge with a roar that felt like a physical shockwave, his fist connecting with the she-wolf's jaw and sending her skidding across the frozen grass. Any man or woman who touches her, Kalen bellowed, his eyes now a terrifying luminescent gold that lit up the snow falling around them, dies by my hand tonight. But the hollowed were already upon them. They didn't care about royal decrees. They moved like ink in water, bypassing the pack's warriors and heading straight for the ghost wolf. One of the creatures, a massive beast with its ribcage exposed through its fur, leapt over the great pyre. Lyra had nowhere to run. The cliff was at her back and the king was occupied fending off 3 attackers at once. In that moment of absolute bone-chilling fear, Lyra didn't scream. She felt a heat ignite at the base of her spine, the same heat she had felt when Kalen touched her. It wasn't the heat of a wolf. It was something older. Something cooler. As the beast's claws reached for her face, Lyra threw her hands up. She expected the sting of death. Instead, a pulse of shimmering silver-blue energy erupted from her skin. It wasn't a blast, it was a wall. The hollowed creature slammed into the invisible barrier and was thrown back 50 feet, its fur smoking as if it had touched the moon itself. The clearing went silent. Even the ferals stopped. Kalen turned, his chest heaving, his gaze locking onto Lyra. She was standing there, her hands glowing with a soft, ethereal light, her eyes no longer brown, but a liquid silver that matched the winter moon. The lunar shield, the elder whispered, falling to his knees. The mark of the High Queen. But the revelation came with a price. Silas smiled, exposing gums blackened by rot. So the legends were true. The Queen has returned, and she is unawakened. A vessel waiting to be filled. With a shrill whistle, Silas gave the order. The ferals didn't attack. They retreated, dragging 2 of the pack's elders with them into the dark. Keep her, King. Silas shouted from the shadows. Protect her for us. For when the blood moon arrives in 3 days, we won't just take your valley. We will take your queen, and with her blood we will hunt the sun itself. As the forest swallowed the monsters, Kalen turned to Lyra. The pack was staring at her with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of a servant but the fear of a miracle. Lyra's legs gave out, the silver light fading from her skin. Kalen caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her small body into the massive heat of his chest. You're shaking, he murmured, his voice thick with a sudden fierce protectiveness. What did I do? She whispered, clutching the scarred leather of his vest. What am I? Kalen looked at his people, then at the dark line of the trees where the enemy waited. You are the reason this pack survives, he said, his voice hard as iron. And you are the reason I will never let another man lead them. We have 3 days before the blood moon. 3 days to turn a ghost into a goddess. But as he carried her toward the royal keep, Lyra saw the look on Kalen's face. It wasn't triumph. It was the look of a man who knew he had just started a war he might not live to finish. The queen has awakened and the war has begun. The pharaohs want her blood and the pack is divided. The royal keep was not a place of comfort. It was a fortress of bone-chilling stone and ancient, heavy tapestries that seemed to whisper the failures of kings past. In the center of the high training hall, Lyra stood on a circular dais of white marble. She felt small, her simple omega tunic replaced by a training shift of boiled leather that chafed her skin. Kalen Thorne paced around her, his movements a predatory prowl. He had discarded his royal mantle, wearing only dark trousers. The sweat on his back glistened under the torchlight, highlighting the corded muscle of a man who had fought for every inch of his territory. Again, Kalen commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Don't think about the shield. Don't think about the light. Feel the hum in your marrow. It's not magic, Lyra. It's your blood recognizing the moon. Before we see if Lyra can summon the silver fire again, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a mentor or a teacher who pushed you harder than you thought you could go? Someone who saw a strength in you that you hadn't found yet? Share your story in the comments. I love reading about your personal growth. And if you're rooting for the ghost wolf to become a queen, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. The blood moon is rising. Lyra closed her eyes, trying to find that spark. But all she felt was the cold. I can't, Kalen. In the valley it was fear. I was going to die. Here it's just me. The girl who sweeps floors. Kalen stopped in front of her. The heat radiating from him was a physical force, pulling at her senses. He reached out not with a strike but with a touch that was dangerously tender. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her jawline. You were never just the girl who sweeps floors, he whispered, his golden eyes searching hers. I watched you for months in that library. I saw the way you touched the ancient scrolls, as if you were stroking the cheek of a friend. You have a soul that the alphas of this pack will never understand. That is why the shield chose you. The intimacy was more terrifying than the ferals. Lyra's breath hitched. You watched me. Before the ceremony. I couldn't look away, Kalen admitted, his voice dropping an octave. You were a mystery I couldn't solve. A scent I couldn't find in any ledger. I told myself it was suspicion. But my wolf knew he was looking at his home. The air between them charged with a sudden electric tension. It wasn't just the bond, it was a raw human attraction that defied the laws of the pack. Kalen leaned in, his scent of sandalwood and winter air enveloping her. For a heartbeat the training was forgotten. Then the heavy oak doors of the hall slammed open. Lady Isabella marched in, followed by 2 high alpha guards. Her face was a mask of cold fury. The council is meeting, Kalen. They are calling for a vote of no confidence. They say you've been bewitched by an Omega's scent, that you're risking the entire pack for a peasant's delusion. Kalen straightened, his protective stance immediate as he stepped between Lyra and the intruders. The council can vote until their tongues rot. I am the king by blood and battle. And what happens when Silas and his hollowed return? Isabella sneered, her eyes darting to Lyra with murderous intent. Will you hide behind her imaginary shield? Or will you watch as they tear our children apart because you were too busy playing protector to a runt? Lyra flinched. The words hit a red raw nerve. She looked at Kalen's back, the broad shoulders that carried the weight of thousands. She saw the scars she hadn't noticed before, the ones on his ribs that looked like they had come from internal betrayals, not external wars. I am not a runt, Lyra said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. Isabella laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Then prove it. The trials of the moon are tonight. If you are truly the High Queen, you must walk through the Chamber of Echoes. If you survive, the council will bow. If you fail, Kalen will be forced to execute you himself for treason against the bloodline. Kalen whirled around, his eyes flashing gold. I will not let her enter the chamber. It's a death trap for those without a shifted form. It is the law, Kalen, a new voice echoed. The lead elder stood in the doorway, his silver spear glinting. You claimed her before the moon. Now she must prove the moon claimed her back. Or she dies at midnight. Lyra looked at Kalen. She saw the agony in his expression. The conflict between the king who must uphold the law and the man who wanted to spirit her away to the ends of the earth. She reached out, her small hand catching his massive, scarred wrist. I'll do it, she whispered. Lyra, no, Kalen groaned, turning to her. You don't know what's in there. I know what's out here, she countered, looking at the hateful eyes of the alphas. If I don't go in, you lose your crown. And if you lose your crown, there's no one left to protect the Omegas when the Ferals come. I'm going in. As the guards led her away toward the darkened catacombs of the keep, Kalen watched her go, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. He knew the secret of the chamber. It didn't test strength. It tested the heart's deepest fear. And Lyra's deepest fear was that she was exactly what they said she was. Nothing. The gauntlet has been thrown. Lyra must face the Chamber of Echoes to save Kalen's throne, but the elders have rigged the game. The Chamber of Echoes was not a room. It was a throat of jagged stone that swallowed the light of the torches. As the heavy iron portcullis slammed shut behind Lyra, the silence was so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing against her eardrums. The air smelled of damp earth and something ancient, the scent of fossils and forgotten prayers. Walls of polished obsidian lined the cavern, reflecting not Lyra's face but her fears. In the dark glass she didn't see a potential queen. She saw the runt scrubbing floors. She saw the backs of 100 Lycans turned toward her in disgust. We are at the heart of the mystery. Have you ever discovered that the thing you were most ashamed of was actually your greatest strength? That flaw that turned out to be a superpower? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you're ready for the truth about the ghost wolves, make sure you're subscribed. This revelation changes the entire war. You don't belong here, a voice whispered from the shadows. It sounded like her mother's voice but twisted, cold and hollow. The moon doesn't see ghosts, Lyra. Why do you think you never shifted? Why do you think your blood is silent? Lyra stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm not silent. Kalen heard me. Kalen heard a song he wanted to hear, the echo hissed. But look at the walls, little girl. Look at the history they hid from you. As Lyra moved deeper, the obsidian began to glow with a faint, bioluminescent blue. It wasn't reflecting her anymore. It was showing her a story. She saw images of the first pack. A time when Lycans didn't just rule the forests but the tides and the stars. She saw the ghost wolves not as outcasts but as the high guard. They weren't weak because they didn't shift. They were powerful because they stayed human. In the ancient world, the shift was a tool, but the human form was the anchor for the spirit. The ghost wolves were the only ones who could channel the moon's raw energy without being consumed by the beast. They didn't exile us because we were broken, Lyra realized, her voice echoing off the glass. They exiled us because we were the only ones who could strip an alpha of his power. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The first blood wasn't a lineage of monsters. It was a lineage of correction. The ghost wolves were the balance. And the elders, the men who had spent centuries building a hierarchy of raw animalistic dominance, had spent those same centuries trying to breed the human anchor out of the pack. They didn't hate her because she was a nothing. They hated her because she was the only one who could make them nothing. Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet trembled. The obsidian walls cracked, and from the fissures stepped a figure draped in the ceremonial robes of the High Council. It was the lead elder, but he wasn't carrying a spear. He was carrying a vial of shimmering, dark liquid, wolfsbane distillate. You were never meant to see the murals, Lyra, the elder said, his face a mask of cold, bureaucratic murder. We told the king the chamber would test you. We didn't tell him I would be the one to ensure you failed. You've been lying to the pack for generations, Lyra said, her silver eyes beginning to flicker with a steady, defiant light. You turned us into slaves because you were afraid of the shield. I am afraid of chaos, the elder countered, uncorking the vial. The scent of the poison was enough to make Lyra's lungs seize. A king who answers to a queen who can strip his power is a king who cannot lead a war. Silas is coming for the valley. We need a beast on the throne, not a man in love. The elder lunged, the poison aimed for her heart. But outside, the keep was under attack. The Ferals had arrived early. The sound of stone shattering and Lycans screaming echoed down the ventilation shafts. Kalen was fighting a war on the surface and Lyra was fighting a war in the dark. Kalen! Lyra screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the stone. The elder pinned her against the mural of the first queen. He can't hear you, runt. Die like the ghost you are. As the needle-sharp tip of the elder's dagger, coated in the distillate, brushed the skin of her throat, Lyra didn't reach for fear. She reached for the history. She reached for the thousands of ghost wolves who had been silenced before her. "I am the anchor," she whispered. The silver light didn't just pulse this time, it erupted. It wasn't a shield, it was a purge. The light hit the elder, and for a second his wolf spirit was visible. A snarling, pathetic thing that shriveled under the gaze of the moon. He was thrown back against the far wall, the poison vial shattering on the stone. The chamber doors groaned, then exploded inward. Kalen Thorne stood there, covered in the soot and blood of the battle above, his golden eyes wild with a desperation that bordered on madness. He saw the elder on the floor, and he saw Lyra, standing in the center of a swirling vortex of silver light. "Lyra!" he roared, leaping across the cavern. He didn't check the elder. He didn't look at the murals. He grabbed her, pulling her into his arms with a force that knocked the breath from her. "I thought I lost you," he groaned into her hair, his body shaking with the aftershocks of the fight. "The ferals. They're in the courtyard. Silas is calling for you, Lyra. He knows you're awake." Lyra looked at the murals one last time, then at the man holding her. "Kalen, the elders. They've been poisoning the pack's history. I'm not just a mate. I'm the one who can stop Silas. But I need you to do something you've never done before." "Anything," he vowed. "You have to stop being the beast," she said, her silver eyes locking onto his gold ones. "You have to let me anchor you. If we fight as monsters, we lose. We have to fight as the first blood." But as they turned to face the entrance, a shadow loomed. Silas Vane stood in the ruins of the gate, the blood moon already beginning to tint the sky a vengeful, bruised red. "The anchor and the king," Silas purred, his milky eyes fixed on the silver glow. "How poetic. I think I'll enjoy breaking your bond before I drink the light from your veins. The truth is out. Lyra is the anchor who can balance the Lycan's beast, but the blood moon is here and Silas is at the door." The air in the Chamber of Echoes didn't just turn cold. It turned stagnant, as if the very oxygen was being consumed by the presence of Silas Vane. The blood moon, now a bloated, crimson eye in the sky above the shattered ceiling, cast a gory light over the white marble. Silas didn't move like a wolf. He moved like a shadow detached from its source. Behind him, the hollowed began to crawl over the ruins of the gate. Their bodies twisted, their skin gray and translucent, their eyes nothing but pits of black hunger. "The anchor," Silas hissed, his sightless eyes fixed unerringly on Lyra. "The one who keeps the beast on a leash. Do you know what happens to a leash, little ghost, when the dog grows too large? We've reached the moment of ultimate despair. Have you ever felt like the more you tried to help, the worse things became? It's a weight that can break the strongest soul." Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everyone. And if you're holding on to hope for Lyra and Kalen, please hit that subscribe button. We need to stand together for this. Kalen stepped in front of Lyra, his back a wall of scarred muscle. But something was wrong. His golden eyes were flickering, the pupils dilating until the gold was almost swallowed by black. The blood moon wasn't just a celestial event. It was a siren song for the predatory madness he had spent his life suppressing. "Kalen," Lyra whispered, reaching for his shoulder. He flinched away from her touch, a low, tectonic growl vibrating in his throat. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stone. "The moon, it's pulling at the seams, Lyra. I can't find the man." "That's the beauty of my gift," Silas cackled, stepping into the chamber. He held up a shard of obsidian dipped in the same wolfsbane distillate the elder had used. "The blood moon turns the king into a monster, and the poison turns the monster into a slave. Once I sever your connection, Lyra, he won't be your protector. He'll be my primary hunter. And his first meal will be the girl who tried to tame him." Silas flicked his wrist. The hollowed lunged. Kalen roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, and shifted. But it wasn't the noble, silver-tipped transformation Lyra had seen before. It was violent. Bones snapped and reformed with wet, sickening thuds. His fur turned the color of dried blood under the lunar light. He met the hollowed midair, a whirlwind of teeth and claws, but he wasn't fighting for the pack anymore. He was fighting for the kill. "Kalen, stop!" Lyra cried, her silver light flickering weakly. She tried to project the shield, but the Chamber of Echoes began to live up to its name. The walls whispered her failures back at her. "You're just an omega. You're a ghost. You're the reason he's losing his mind." Silas bypassed the carnage, walking toward Lyra with the obsidian shard raised. "He can't hear you, child. He's drowning in the red. And without his anchor, you're just a battery waiting to be drained." He struck. The shard sliced across Lyra's arm. The pain was a white-hot iron, but it wasn't the wound that hurt. It was the drain. The silver light began to flow out of her, not as a pulse but as a leak, being absorbed by the black stone in Silas's hand. Lyra fell to her knees, her vision blurring. She looked at Kalen. He was pinned under 3 hollowed, his claws rending their flesh, but his eyes, they were entirely black. He looked at Lyra, and for the first time he didn't recognize her. He snarled at her, a predatory hunger crossing his face that mirrored Silas's own. "See," Silas whispered, leaning over her, his breath smelling of rot. "Even your king wants you dead. The ghost wolf dies alone just like she lived." In the courtyard above, the screams of the Omegas being rounded up by the ferals echoed down the shafts. The keep was falling. The king was a beast. The queen was bleeding out. Lyra looked at the mural of the first queen one last time. The image was being splashed with the crimson light of the moon. She realized then that the anchor wasn't meant to hold the wolf back. It was meant to carry it. But she was too weak. As Silas raised the shard for the final heart strike, Lyra closed her eyes. She had found her voice only to have it cut out in the dark. "I'm sorry, Kalen," she whispered into the cold stone. The black shard descended. "The king is lost to the madness, the queen is at death's door, and the enemy has won. Is this the end of the first blood?" The obsidian shard didn't find Lyra's heart. Just as the black glass grazed the fabric of her shift, a hand, scarred, massive, and trembling with a lethal restrained power, caught Silas's wrist. The sound of bones snapping under the pressure was like dry wood in a winter fire. Silas let out a shriek that was more beast than man, the hollowed, around them freezing in mid-motion. Kalen Thorne didn't look like a king. He looked like a nightmare. His form was caught in a jagged, painful half-shift. His face was a mask of fur and human agony, his eyes still swimming in that terrifying lunar black. But he was there. He had crawled through the madness of the blood moon for one thing, the scent of her blood. "We are at the precipice of the final stand. Have you ever found a strength you didn't know you had because someone you loved was in danger? That moment where the impossible becomes mandatory? Tell me your breakthrough stories in the comments. And if you're ready to see the ghost wolf lead the pack, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. The tide is turning." "Touched her," Kalen rasped, his voice a guttural grinding of tectonic plates. Silas clawed at Kalen's arm, his milky eyes wide with a sudden, sharp terror. "The moon. The moon owns you, beast. You should be tearing her throat out." "The moon owns the wolf," Kalen growled, his grip tightening until the obsidian shard fell from Silas's ruined hand. "But I am the man." With a roar that shook the very foundations of the keep, Kalen hurled Silas across the chamber, sending the feral crashing into the mural of the first queen. But Kalen collapsed instantly, the blackness in his eyes surging again. He clawed at his own chest, his body convulsing as the blood moon tried to reclaim its slave. I can't hold it." Lyra didn't run. She dragged herself across the cold stone, her arm trailing silver-red blood. She didn't reach for her fear anymore. She reached for the history. She realized the anchor wasn't a cage, it was a lighthouse. "I'm not a ghost, Kalen," she whispered, her voice gaining a metallic celestial resonance that silenced the whispers in the walls. "And you're not a monster." She reached out and pressed her bleeding palm directly against his heart. The contact was like a lightning strike. The silver light from her blood didn't just pulse, it flooded into him. For a second, the entire chamber of echoes was washed in a brilliant, blinding white that turned the crimson moonlight into pale ash. Lyra felt the beast. She felt the centuries of rage, the hunger, the predatory instinct that had been used as a weapon by the elders. She didn't fight it. He accepted it. She wrapped her human consciousness around his lupin fire, smoothing the jagged edges of his soul. "Look at me, Kalen," she commanded. Kalen's eyes cleared. The black receded, replaced not by the old gold, but by a shimmering liquid silver that matched her own. The shift stabilized. He didn't shrink, he transformed into something the world hadn't seen in 300 years. A solar wolf, a creature of balance, massive and noble, his fur tipped in moonlight. In that moment the bond didn't just click, it roared. Upstairs, the Omegas who had been huddled in fear felt the shift. The low-castes stood up, their eyes glowing with a sudden reflected silver. The ghost wolves were waking up across the valley. "The anchor is set," Lyra whispered, standing up as the silver fire began to wreath her body like a shroud of stars. Silas scrambled back, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "It doesn't matter. The hollowed outnumber you. The pack is broken." "The pack is finally whole," Lyra countered, her voice echoing with the authority of the First Queen. She looked at Kaelin, the Silver King. He lowered his head, a gesture of absolute submission to his anchor, before letting out a howl that wasn't a call to hunt, it was a call to rise. From the shadows of the catacombs, the ghost wolves emerged not with teeth, but with the same silver-blue light in their hands. The Elder's reign of fear was over. The rebellion had found its heartbeat. "Now," Lyra said, her hand resting on the Silver King's head. "We show them what happens when the shadow stops hiding. The bond is perfected and the true power of the first blood has been unleashed. But Silas still has an army and the blood moon isn't over yet." The air in the Valley of Howls didn't just vibrate, it shattered. As Lyra and the Silver King emerged from the catacombs, the sky above Oakhaven was a bruised, bleeding purple, but the ground below was a sea of shimmering starlight. The ghost wolves, the Omegas who had been told for centuries they were nothing, stood in a phalanx around the keep, their hands glowing with the rediscovered lunar fire. Silas Vane stood in the center of the courtyard, his hollowed, snarling and snapping at the invisible pressure of Lyra's presence. He looked at the girl who had been a servant and saw a goddess. He looked at the king who had been a beast and saw a force of nature. "We are at the summit of the war. Have you ever seen a moment where the powerless finally realized they held all the cards? There is nothing more beautiful than the underdog taking back their life. Tell me about your favorite triumph moment in the comments. And if you're ready to see Silas fall, hit that subscribe button. The resolution is here. You think a spark can stop a flood?" Silas shrieked, his milky eyes weeping black ichor. "Hollowed. Feast on their hope. Tear the heart out of the anchor." The hollowed lunged, a wave of gray flesh and black hunger. But they didn't reach the line. Lyra stepped forward, her silver hair whipping in a wind that came from nowhere. She didn't use a sword. She used the silence. She reached out with her mind and touched the beast inside every hollowed creature, the part of them that had been tortured into madness. "Sleep," Lyra commanded, her voice a resonant multitonal chord that bypassed their ears and hit their souls. The silver light swept across the courtyard like a scythe. One by one the hollowed didn't just die, they settled. Their gray skin turned back to fur, their black eyes flickered and dimmed. They collapsed into the snow not as monsters but as exhausted wolves, the curse of Silas Vane stripped from their blood by the anchor's touch. Silas backed away, his hands clawing at the air. "No. My army. My power." Kaelin, in his massive silver-tipped solar wolf form, didn't growl. He let out a sound that was half howl, half hymn. He leaped, a blur of moonlight, pinning Silas against the great pyre. He didn't tear his throat out. He shifted back to his human form midair, landing with a heavy thud, his silver eyes locking onto Silas's sightless ones. "You wanted the blood moon's power, Silas," Kaelin said, his voice deep and steady. "But the moon doesn't give power to the cruel. It gives it to the needed." Kaelin reached out and grabbed the obsidian shard Silas still clutched. He didn't shatter it. He handed it to Lyra. Lyra walked toward the feral leader. The pack, the high alphas, the elders who were still alive, the warriors, all watched in a stunned, submissive silence. She held the shard up to the bleeding moon. "The shadow is over," Lyra said. She drove the shard into the stone of the great pyre. The black glass didn't break, it dissolved. A pulse of pure, blinding white light erupted from the stone, shooting up into the sky and piercing the center of the blood moon. The crimson bled away. The bruised purple faded. The moon turned a brilliant, pristine silver, and the lunar thread was finally, truly tied. Silas Vane didn't survive the purification. He dissolved into a pile of gray ash that the winter wind carried away into the whispering woods, leaving nothing but the silence of the valley behind. The lead elder crawled forward, his robes torn, his silver spear broken. He looked at Lyra, then at Kaelin. "The prophecy, the ghost wolf, we were wrong. We were so wrong. Kaelin didn't look at the elder. He looked at Lyra. He walked to her, his movements no longer a predator's prowl but a partner's stride. He took her hand, the hand that had anchored his soul, and raised it toward the sky. "Behold your queen." Kaelin bellowed. This time the howl that answered wasn't from a few. It was from everyone. The High Alphas dropped to their knees. The warriors bowed their heads. And the Omegas, the new High Guard, raised their glowing hands in a salute that lit up the entire valley. The war was over. The rebellion had won. And the girl who hid in the shadows had become the sun that the night finally deserved. The valley is reclaimed, the monsters are gone, and the king and queen are united. But how does the ghost wolf rule a pack that used to hate her? The morning after the blood moon didn't arrive with the usual harsh, gray chill of the valley. Instead, the sun broke over the obsidian peaks in a flood of warm gold, melting the frost off the great pyre. The scent of char and old blood was gone, replaced by the crisp, clean aroma of mountain air and blooming jasmine, a scent that had followed Lyra her entire life, finally recognized for the royal lineage it carried. Lyra stood on the high balcony of the royal keep, her hands resting on the stone railing. She wasn't wearing the boiled leather of a soldier or the rags of a servant. She wore a gown of gossamer silver, woven from the silk of the lunar moths that only appeared when a true queen ascended. Her hair, once a dull brown, now held permanent streaks of starlight that shimmered even in the daylight. "We have reached the end of our journey. I am so incredibly moved by the support you've shown for Lyra and Kaelin. What was the most emotional moment for you? Was it the first time Kaelin caught her scent, or the moment she anchored his soul in the dark? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing how these stories touch your hearts. And if you want to see more Ghost Wolf legends, make sure you're subscribed. Our pack is only getting stronger." Kaelin stepped out from the shadows of the archway. He didn't approach her as a king demanding attention. He approached her as a man coming home. He was dressed in a simple white tunic, the silver scars on his chest a testament to the war they had ended together. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his chin resting on her shoulder. "The elders have been relocated to the outer wards," Kaelin murmured, his voice a deep, contented rumble. "The council has been dissolved. From now on the pack is led by the anchor and the wolf. No more castes. No more Omegas. And the ghost wolves?" Lyra asked, turning in his arms. "They are the High Guard now," Kaelin said, a proud wolfish smile touching his lips. "They're teaching the alphas how to find the human again. You didn't just save my life, Lyra. You saved the soul of every person in this valley." He reached into the folds of his tunic and pulled out a heavy ancient pendant, a piece of raw moonstone encased in silver filigree. It was the heart of the first queen, a relic that had been lost by the elders centuries ago. He placed it around her neck, the stone glowing softly as it touched her skin. "I have a confession," Kaelin whispered, his gold and silver eyes locking onto hers. "That night on the rooftops before the ceremony, I didn't just watch you because I was curious. I watched you because you were the only thing in this world that made me feel like I wasn't a monster. You were my anchor long before I knew what the word meant." Lyra reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And I watched the moon because I thought it was the only thing that saw me. I didn't know the moon was just looking through your eyes." The valley below erupted in a chorus of howls, not the jagged, fearful sounds of the past, but a harmonious, melodic song of peace. The hallowed who had been purified were resting in the meadows. The warriors were breaking bread with the servants. The hierarchy of hate had been replaced by a circle of light. Kaelin leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that tasted of honey and victory. In that moment the ghost wolf was gone. In her place stood a queen who didn't need to shift to be powerful, and a king who didn't need to roar to be heard. As they stood together on the balcony, overlooking the kingdom they had reclaimed, the sun and the moon shared the sky for one brief, beautiful hour. The lunar thread was no longer a myth. It was the heartbeat of a new era. Thank you all so much for being part of this epic saga. If you felt the power of the anchor tonight, drop a silver in the comments to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next emotional masterpiece. Until next time, remember, your greatest weakness might just be the thing that saves the world.